Hey everyone, on the next episode of Noon, allow me to introduce you to Drew, a dynamic professional making significant strides in the field of EMS. Drew wears multiple hats as a flight paramedic and a paramedic program director. His passion lies in elevating the paramedic practice to new heights, focusing on expanding the scope and professionalism within the field. Join us for an enlightening conversation as Drew shares his experiences as a flight paramedic, delves into the intricacies of paramedic education as a program director, and discusses his mission to enhance the professionalism and scope of paramedic practice. This episode promises to be an insightful exploration into the evolving landscape of EMS. Let's get started. Before we begin today, a quick heads up. Noon is spreading the holiday cheer with a 20% discount using code NOON20. That's NOON20. This is ideal for gifting medical providers or indulging yourself. Act quickly. The offer ends December 31st. Share photos of wearing Noon gear on our Facebook group page for a chance to win more fantastic merch in upcoming raffles. Check out the link in the episode description below. Hey everyone, if you're looking for an amazing book to read, I have a great suggestion. Ready Left, Ready Right. It's a medical thriller written by one of my good friends and favorite new authors, D.D Finder. D.D Finder believes in supporting first responders and their mental health, so with every purchase of Ready Left, Ready Right, a portion of the proceeds goes directly to the nonprofits, Debriefing the Front Lines, 62 Romeo, and the Overwatch Collective. The book is now available on Amazon. Don't forget to listen to our podcast interview with D.D Finder, Season 2, Episode 14. You'll be able to find the link for his book and our Noon interview in the description below. All right, Drew, thank you so much for joining us on the 911 Nonsense podcast today. I appreciate you coming out.
Yeah, so excited to be here and finally get on here and get to chat with you.
Yeah, I think it's so cool. You reached out to me and I really appreciate it. I love when people reach out to me and tell me that they're really interested in being on the show.
Yeah, I think you have a really great platform of getting different types of people on and providers, and reached out because I run a paramedic program, and we're trying to start some new things, and I thought, I really want to share this with the broader community in our state and kind of let your listeners know like what we're trying to do, and hopefully get more people interested in our program.
Perfect. Well, let's start with an introduction and then we'll move on.
Yeah. So my name's Drew. I've been a paramedic for going on about 15 years. I started EMS in 2007 as an EMT basic in a very rural part of Northern California, and quickly realized I wanted to be a paramedic and went to paramedic school in Northern California. And then, my career has kind of taken me all over the place. I was a rural paramedic for a long time and then moved into a very urban fire department type of EMS and did that in Sacramento, California for like 5 years. But medicine's always been my passion, and really advancing the EMS profession is my passion. So I moved on to the flight world and did that for about 5 years for various entities. I had the opportunity to fly in like one of the most beautiful places in the country in Lake Tahoe. Went out to the East Coast and then ended up here in New Mexico. And when I first moved here, I started with a flight agency and kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do here and how I can continue, like really what my passion has been is like how I want to make this profession sustainable for the next generation and really see it grow into what the potential it has to be. And I found my way into education, first as an adjunct instructor, and quickly was asked, there was a vacancy for the director position here at the college and was asked to fill that role. And so jumped into that role. And then next thing I know, I was asked to jump into the lead instructor role. So I'm kind of wearing a lot of hats within the education world here at the college, but I really love the job. I love getting to be a part of like the future generations education and help mold and shape the way that we train paramedics. And try to, make changes in that world and, you know, affect change within our community by putting out the kind of paramedics that, uh, I feel the profession really needs. And that's not the cookie cutter paramedic. It's the critical thinker who thinks about their community, holistically and is able to try to implement changes and not just sort of work in a system for a couple of years and quit and move on to something else.
What are you doing to help influence that change?
So originally it started just kind of like, let's revamp the curriculum and look at, one of the main things like complaints I would get from our medical directors and physicians locally is the students just lack this critical thinking. It's like, well, it's kind of hard to teach critical thinking in a certificate program that's generally about a year long, and we can't, put them in a sociology class and expose students to all these things. But how do we, organically build that into the program? And it's been a unique challenge, and I think a worthwhile challenge. But incorporating things like uh, motivational interviewing and talking about trauma informed care and talking about like community needs, having mental health workers come in and talk about behavioral health instead of just somebody who's 20 years on the street saying, well, this is how, you deal with this situation. It's like actually getting the people that do that work and understand these diagnoses and can really explain to the students in a way that is meaningful. So that's been kind of one phase, I would say. Two is advancing our clinical education to not just be like a lowest common denominator style of education where we're like, well, we're just going to keep it basic because we're struggling to meet the basics in EMS. So let's just not expand what we're teaching. Let's just keep it to the basics and teach to the National Registry. And that's not, since taking over here and kind of like our team together is really has that shared philosophy. So it's been things like we rolled out point of care ultrasound into our curriculum, like completely into a big way that, they're learning all the different types of assessments. They carry it in their bags during simulation. They learn labs, they learn ABGs, they learn all these kind of more advanced topics that aren't normally taught in paramedic school, but I think it gets them excited about medicine and what you can do as a paramedic and like then they go out and they're trying to advocate for changes within their agencies. And we've seen now our local agencies purchase ultrasounds for all their ambulances because our students are coming out saying we should be doing this. They're buying pumps and getting things on their ambulances to sort of advance their care. And so that's kind of the second phase, I would say, of how trying to influence change and grow the profession in small ways from this like position of like an education director, I guess.
That's a really good answer. And with ultrasound, is that a special skill in this state or?
So it's been up for discussion. Right now, I believe it is a special skill, but initially it was told it was not a special skill, that it fell under point of care testing, because in the state they're allowed to do point of care labs and allowed to do like, blood glucose testing and tidal CO2. All those things fall under this category of point of care testing. And it's sort of up in the air whether ultrasound fits into that. So right now it is a special skill. There are agencies that have that special skill. But I'd like to see that change because I think that special skill process should be reserved for things that are invasive. And, when there's something that could be implemented and trained on and practiced without, risk to your patient, and there's a benefit to be had if, when providers are properly trained with it, we can, especially in these rural areas, really enhance decision making, enhance, pre-alerting certain hospitals of types of conditions and improving that continuum of care. I think it's really important, especially in a rural area, to be thinking about those things. And I'd like to see it be more of a standard thing, a skill, because sometimes putting together those special skills applications and the review process can take a long time, and it can be a little daunting for a rural agency to want to go through that process. And they tend to just, let's just stick to whatever's in the basic scope. And I don't think it needs to be, a highly regulated special skill, in my opinion. So,
Sure, and especially in New Mexico, right, where we do have a lot of rural areas, and not just rural, but we have a lot of poverty here, right? So sometimes that medical decision on whether or not they should go to a hospital depends on what that EMT or paramedic is telling them.
yeah, absolutely. And I think, a lot of our assessments that we do are very subjective because the nature of where we practice is we don't have a CT scan, we don't have an X-ray machine and a lab and specialists that can come down and take a look at your patient. So what happens is and there's evidence to support this, that we're not very good at identifying like acute pulmonary edema. We're not very good at identifying tension pneumothorax and treating it. And what goes into that? It's one, there's a subjectivity to our assessments, like you have to listen to lung sounds. Well, not always with a pneumo do you have absent lung sounds. And with pulmonary edema, it's not always going to be the obvious, CHF with, frothy sputum and hypertensive and rails. They have comorbidities. And then there's also like a bias that could go into that too, where you're, have this bias at play with how doing your assessment, and that subjectivity kind of plays into that. And when you have an image, you can put an ultrasound on somebody's chest and see B lines. It doesn't matter. All that it sort of removes some of those barriers, I think. And research sort of indicates that as well. So it improves that sensitivity and accuracy of assessments dramatically for paramedics and reduces time to appropriate treatment. So I just think, the people out there that are against it, it's a change. We don't like change in public safety in these worlds, but we also don't like the way things are. So
Yeah.
it's sort of a double-edged sword. And I think it's just, I was started as a paramedic when 12 leads were new. And I remember having the same arguments with people about scene time and what is it really going to change, and how do you manage the quality assurance and training. And it's now it's hard to imagine an ambulance without the ability to do a 12 leads. So I hope it becomes more prolific in our industry for sure.
So what kind of things are you hoping to rule out or rule in using ultrasounds?
So I guess I can go over what we teach the students and then a little bit some of my experience with it and where it came from. I guess I can start with that. Well, when I first I knew about point of care ultrasound in the field when I was a flight paramedic. I started getting exposed to it, and some agencies were talking about getting it. I was like, oh, cool. It's kind of this fad new thing. Like, you're cool if you have the ultrasound. And I didn't really think anything of it. I thought, well, my assessments are fine. We take care of patients just fine. I don't need an ultrasound to tell me, this patient has internal trauma or whatever. But then I got a job at an agency that was pretty progressive with the medicine they were doing. I believe you had a PA on from that same agency. And I had the opportunity, they had an ultrasound and they promoted it pretty heavily with their crews and put us through some good training. And then I had the opportunity to work with some very experienced PAs and physicians as my partner on the helicopter that used ultrasound very regularly in their assessments. And I sort of started to see this difference in care, this sort of definitive a way of assessing a patient. Like, we're not just putting a patient on a pressor. Now we have an ability to assess, are they going to be fluid responsive or not? We can actually look at their heart and see if they is there good contractility? Do we have good ventricular filling? Are there any valve issues? And so there's a lot more information. And so from a critical care transport aspect, I really saw like, wow, this is a cool tool to have. And it wasn't until I was working on a local ski patrol and we had a patient that had a tension pneumo. And I wasn't on this call, was some of my colleagues, and the local fire department came, all the ALS ski patrollers, everybody missed this tension pneumothorax. And it was pretty textbook, nothing against the providers that missed it. It was really just not obvious because the lung sounds were present, but there was a failing blood pressure and thoracic trauma involved. And it wasn't until the helicopter landed and the flight paramedic grabbed their ultrasound and quickly identified this tension pneumo, and they treated it. And it really made a huge difference. And I'm like, this needs to be in the field, and it has applications outside of a critical care world. So that's my background with it. And I started to really get into it, training a lot more and a lot more on it. And then when I started to get into education, it became uh, sort of a passion project, if you will, to like bring it into our program and roll it out as part of our curriculum. We bought 2 probes on a grant, so they were just sitting here. And so we built a curriculum and built it around what's applicable to the 911 EMS paramedic. And so it's primarily like first thing they learn is A&P identification. So we use it in their A&P block to teach them about um, anatomical structures, actually how big is a kidney? Well, let's look at one and look at its relationship to the liver and to the spleen and where it sort of lies in the peritoneal cavity. And let's look at the lung and the pleura, and let's look at the heart, and let's actually look at these valves working and opening and closing, and like where the aorta sits compared to the ventricle. And so that's their first thing. It's all just exploratory, getting used to holding it and just looking at stuff. And then they learn the respiratory assessment. So their first block is they learn how to identify pulmonary edema, and pneumothorax, pneumonia, so they can identify consolidation, and a pleural effusion, so collection of fluid in that thoracic space. And so they learn that assessment, and they learn those very specific kind of findings. Then we move on to cardiovascular. They'll learn to look at contractility, and they'll look at the wall motion. They'll look at the valves. They'll look at the dimensions of the heart to see, is the right ventricle too big? Is the left ventricle really big? Is there potential like PE that's backing up blood into the right ventricle and the right atria that's really dilating those things? So they kind of learn some of those findings. And then they learn to look at, if they do a 12 lead and they're really concerned about cardiac, and maybe the 12 lead isn't obvious or it has some distracting sort of findings, that the ultrasound can help differentiate some of those cardiac conditions. So is there inadequate wall motion? That could indicate there is ischemia occurring. So it gives them more information. And then the last thing we teach them is the trauma assessment. So they learn to just do the EFAST exam and identify those internal injuries as well as pneumothorax and pericardial effusions. So it's quite a bit, but we spread it out over the whole year, and the students are, they really enjoy it, and it's been a great thing for our program. I think when they go out to their clinicals, they do ultrasound in their clinicals, and a lot of the feedback we get from the physicians has been really positive. We actually, with this next class, have local ED physicians coming and taking the ultrasound training with the paramedics to refresh their skills on it. So it's been really great to collaborate with our local hospitals and seeing that kind of blossom and grow. And I think it's been great to show that, hey, paramedics are learning modern things, evidence-based things, and they have value in the healthcare system. So I think it's good cross collaboration.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. It sounds like a really cool tool to be used in the field. Do you think that that's something that would be good in a city setting where like the hospital's only 10, 15 minutes away?
So I think so. I think just the application has to be different. Like I know Austin Travis County, they use it pretty heavily. It's built into their system. And one of their things, if they have a hypotensive trauma patient that has a positive EFAST exam, they go straight to the OR. And so I think that with the collaboration with your trauma centers and like your local hospitals, it's a huge advantage to speeding up that continuum instead of that patient then has to be differentiated and seen and assessed, and they go in a CT scan, and then they go up to the OR. So it could potentially save time there. I also think in OB, like patients that haven't been receiving prenatal care, they may not, and there you would get that complicated delivery. You may not know if you're getting a breech presentation, and it can provide that really quick assessment to detect breech presentations. So I do think it's applicable everywhere. One of our instructors is always sending me the stuff they're finding in the field, and it's really great to see, they're working in a system that is close to the hospital, but they're able to, find all these pathologies, and then that's used in their report as like a definitive piece of evidence. And then a lot of times the hospital will just roll with that if they're agreeing with what you're seeing. And it just totally speeds up that kind of like continuum, or however you want to call it, but that getting to that right treatment at the right time.
Yeah, no, that transfer of care. That's a really cool tool, and I think could be very applicable to the entire state of New Mexico. I think that's something probably we should be pushing more. Do you think that that's something that might lead to paramedics ultimately getting paid more?
It's hard. That's a hard question. Short answer, probably not. No. But I think as we bring in more reliable information, I think a big issue why paramedics get discounted is the hospital gets so many, turnovers that are inadequate, and so many turnovers that don't really paint a good, clear picture of what's going on. And maybe, certain nurses might see some of us as like, oh, lazy, you didn't get the IV, you missed this simple thing. And that hurts our profession in the long run. Um, those little negatives build up over time, and then that translates into, you know, how this our profession is perceived overall. And I think as we progress and push for more tools and push for better knowledge and better education, we can be received better by our healthcare partners when we bring in, quality assessments and quality patient care that's being handed over appropriately and paints a clear picture. It changes the way that system is perceived. And I think that may not also translate into more pay, but I think we have to start those steps to get to more pay, to fix all the things that a lot of people complain about in EMS. We can't expect to just keep doing the same thing, I think, and expect more. We have to change sort of how we're doing it.
Sure. Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that in the last, 50, 60 years, EMS has progressed significantly, which is really cool. It's been really cool to see all of the things that we've seen change. Even as you were saying earlier, how you got to see kind of 12 leads transition into EMS. We are getting to a point where we are becoming, they tell us constantly don't diagnose in the field, but then they're like, well, what's your diagnosis? What are you calling this? What are you bringing into the hospital right now?
And it's like, if you missed a simple thing diagnosis, or you missed a diagnosis, then you'll hear about that. And so we absolutely diagnose, and we teach our paramedics to have that mindset. Like you don't necessarily need to figure out every call, every patient, but you need to think about yourself as a provider. That's why you're going to all this school. It's to show up and bring the patient the best possible care, and then set them up for success in the healthcare system by doing a really thorough assessment and handing over that care appropriately. And so I think it does a disservice to our patients when we tell our providers, yeah, you don't diagnose, just give everybody the same kind of ALS IV O2 monitor, 12 lead blood sugar, and drop them off at the hospital. That's not really, at that point, we should just go back to the 60s, because we're not providing this continuum of care that I think our profession was designed for. If you go back, read, Kevin Hazard's book, the idea of a paramedic was not to just be rapid transport to the hospital. It was really to set people up for success and to better the whole healthcare system. And sometimes I think we lose sight of that.
Yes, I'm really glad that you name dropped Kevin Hazard because I'm actually talking to him about getting him on the show here pretty soon. So
Oh, that would be great to have. I just read American Sirens, great book, and it's just such a cool story about our profession and people that get down on this profession. I think it's a good book to listen to and kind of hear about where we came from. And you know, if you think that progressing EMS and progressing the profession sounds challenging, just think about the challenges those first paramedics had
Mhm.
to endure and overcome. Far, far greater than what we are facing in our world today, in terms of advancing our level of care and our respect in the profession. So
I agree, and it's actually a really good topic that you bring up because I think with our access to electronics and everything being so portable now, it's actually making it a little bit easier for us, right? I constantly teach EMTs, especially if they're out like in a rural setting. If you have a 12 lead, get the 12 lead. You don't have to be able to actually analyze that 12 lead. If it tells you there's a STEMI, call the hospital and say, hey, this is what it says. It's a STEMI.
and I think that advancing our profession doesn't just happen, I think, from the paramedic level. I think we have to empower those BLS providers and intermediate or AEMTs as well, so that you have just as much responsibility and effect on the patient as your paramedic colleagues do. It's and so I think empowering them to do stuff like that is really great and gives them the tools to know potentially catch something that may be missed. And what's unique here, kind of similar, I guess, to where I started, is like EMTs often are the primary provider, or an AEMT may be the primary provider. And I think that is super important to understand about rural EMS. Then is that not every EMS service has two paramedics on an ambulance, and not every city has access to ALS care. And uh, you know, in these rural areas, we have to empower those providers as well. So I hope that it's a holistic approach to advancing our profession, I think.
Yeah, I think that so when I moved here from Las Cruces when it was just a baby in EMS, one of the things that I learned very quickly was as an intermediate, I was going to be running my own truck in this very small community where I had decided to work. And you really you had to put your big boy or big girl pants on because you are running those calls and you're not going to have ALS nearby. So you have to be making those decisions for those patients.
It's no different, you know, than a paramedic being in that position, and we have to, I think, setting up those levels of education as well to be prepared for that, I think, is something that's super important. And it's hard to do because a lot of EMT education is built around this, that it is a one semester class. And I'm not saying it should be
Mhm.
longer than that, but it's how do we, is it most important that we have them put a tourniquet on, 500 times and put an OPA in, 60 times during the class, or do we start teaching them some of these critical thinking skills earlier? And I would say, like what your experience was, and like similar to mine, responding to a call as an EMT on your own is a much more profound experience than putting in that OPA, over and over and over again. So I think some of those critical care, or not critical care, critical thinking lessons are really important to try to build early on.
I agree 100%. I also feel though, and I wish I would have known this when I was younger and had just gotten into EMT school, like how really dedicated you have to be to this career, right? Because you can go and be this very basic, or very basic paramedic. And just like you were saying, IV O2 on everybody, right? Or you can stop and really start thinking critically about these patients and making those connections in what your treatment is going to be and what you think it might be, what your diagnosis might be.
And I think we underestimate the ability of people to make those decisions. We think, oh well, it's just EMT education. We can't expect that they're going to know the difference between sepsis and whatever. It's, and that I think is not necessarily true. If we challenge people a little bit in their training and in their continuing education, I think it's surprising how well people can quickly pick up on certain things and certain cues and make that differential diagnosis, even with, a minimal level of training. And you know, I've taught EMTs how to do cardiac ultrasounds, and they're just as proficient at it and interpreting those images as the paramedic is, or anybody. And so, I think we got to have confidence in our providers across the board for sure.
I agree. I do agree with that. We do need to have more confidence, but I feel like at the same time, like we've kind of talked about already, like our paramedics and our EMTs also have to show that level of competence, right? So maybe outside of work, going and studying those things that you need to study in order to make yourself feel better.
Yeah, and I'm not a proponent of just like blanket confidence in everybody, and everybody should have all these tools and advanced skills. I really think, if you are, like you said, dedicated to the career, dedicated to being a better provider, and you want to train and learn those things, anybody can learn and anybody could advance their care. And so I really think, like, I love how Austin does their tiered system. It's when they're very progressive EMS system, but not everybody gets those skills. You have to kind of work your way up through the ladder of clinical ladder in order to get access to those more advanced skills. And I think that's a great way of, like, you have to put in the work and show that you're competent and able and to put in the time and work and effort to handle that responsibility. And I think that's a great way of approaching, like, levels of care. Is not bringing us down to the lowest level of, that's out there, the lowest common denominator. I think that's a really bad way of doing medicine. If we treated everything like the lowest common denominator, we wouldn't have, all these specialty types of care and specialty surgeons and special everything that's makes, healthcare possible. So we have to, I think having that tiered approach is a great way in EMS to advance our care without, putting the least amount of people in danger from doing that.
Yeah, I would love to see that. However, and I can't speak for any other state because I've never worked in any other state. I've only worked here. We're so short staffed here, in the whole state. We're so short staffed everywhere that it's hard to get past that, like, layer of common denominator. Just got your license. Let's throw you on a truck by yourself. Do this by yourself. Like, this is what we expect from you.
It is a big challenge, and I deal with that from the aspect of a program director. I get pressure from our agencies to, is the program too long? What can we do to accelerate? Because we need people out in the street filling the seats. And I totally get that struggle, and I see their plight, if you will, like, as, legitimate. And I understand they're just trying to help offload the pressure on their people. But at the same time, that is just a band-aid on a problem. That I think if we make something more attractive, then we get more people to our profession. And the problem is, it's just not very attractive to become a paramedic, and they see, like, oh, I'm just going to get burned out and then want to move on to something else. So why don't I just go to that something else now? And that's a hard question or hard thing to convince somebody to be like, no, why don't you come try this for a little while? So I try to, keep it balanced with our program's 15 months long. So it's a fairly long paramedic program, but I would say that's not a long educational program. But a lot of people would like to see that shorter. But what I will say is that the paramedics that come out of this program that are getting some better critical thinking skills, are getting some coping mechanisms, that are having a good experience that shows them that you can be empowered in this profession, and that there's good medicine that you can provide, and you can provide evidence-based care and be an advocate for your community and for the profession, those paramedics stay in the profession longer. They want to go on and they want to advance and they want to be leaders and do things. It's the person that went through that accelerated program that didn't get those tools. They get put onto a truck, they get mandatory overtime over and over and over again. They're run into the ground and they're like, you know what? Nursing sounds great.
Yeah.
So let me look up that. And how do I get into that? So I don't know. That's my take on it. I know other people are like, probably have a different view, but I think, if you look at the surveys and the things that have been done, it's sort of uh, tells that most people leave the profession because they don't have uh, the opportunities they want, and they're not engaged or challenged in the way they want to be. So,
No, that makes sense. There's so many studies going on right now about EMS and where paramedics are. And I think part of the issue too, right, is the workplace violence. You're just getting the shit kicked out of you every day. And it's not just by the patients, by your bosses, by your coworkers, and then by the hospital staff when you're dropping off those patients also. And it just makes it hard to want to stay here.
it does. It can be a really vicious cycle. I worked in a very busy system in Sacramento as a firefighter paramedic, and it was brutal. I really remember thinking, like, I don't know how anybody can do this for like a sustained period of time, because it was just an endurance, literally like an endurance event every shift. You're going to stay up for 48 hours. You're likely going to get held over another 24 hours, and you're going to get kind of treated like crap around by not only your patients, by the hospital staff, by, you know, a whole multitude of angles that you're kind of receiving it from. And yeah, it was really eye-opening to be in that, coming from a very rural area where, yes, there's incredible challenges there as well, but to be in that like unrelenting busy system was hard. And yeah, I see why people get burned out very easily because
Right.
experiencing it myself.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I was just talking about this today. Like, so if I had stayed with the fire department when I got in, I would be retiring within the next 2 years. I'm kicking myself in the ass for that, right? Because I have put in so much time into EMS, and like, why don't they have para for EMS like they do for the firefighters?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think all of the things that come along with that, like those sustained benefits, for health care and all the things that, that follows you in your life. And, I had a similar thing. I had the retirement at that, CalPERS is like, it's incredible. Lifetime health benefits,
Yeah.
90 year salary. It's one of the highest paid places to be a firefighter. It was great. But I'm like, I was looking at, I have so many years left. There's no way I'm making it to that. There's just no way. And kudos to the people that do. But I think you got to make the choice that's best. And I kick myself too, but I'm also like, I'm so much healthier because of that decision
Yeah.
to not be there.
Mentally, right? You're so much more
Yeah.
mentally healthier. So you talked a little bit about coping skills and how you're providing teaching and coping skills. What are you guys teaching your students?
So for us, it's kind of a multi-pronged approach, but really it came from it started actually before I became a program director. Our clinical coordinator launched a program to try to bring in mental health counseling for our students and having that be built into the tuition. So when they're here, they have access to mental health counseling, and it's encouraged. And we're trying to make it, and this may sound like to some people not great, but a requirement that they attend some counseling sessions during their paramedic program. And I think that is just really helpful to set them up and help build some coping tools. We have also hired a um, crisis counselor who is a clinical psychologist who comes in and teaches about behavioral health, teaches about PTSD, and it helps them understand like what their job is as a paramedic to care for these patients, but it also helps them, have some coping skills to managing those types of calls, which can, we all understand like everyone needs care, but sometimes some patients can be really challenging. And, you know, feeling like you don't have the tools to care for a certain patient population can be really frustrating when your only thing is like, oh, I just can take this person to the hospital. I don't have the right tools to care for this patient. And that tool may not be like a cool scope of practice thing. What it could be is just like an understanding of their condition and an understanding of like what your role is and how you can impact them. And I think that small little strategy can really change how you frame calls, that can sometimes be, less, that can lead to the burnout. Because when you're just feeling like you're just sort of thrown into these situations without tools, I think, at least for me, that was a huge source of burnout. And it was like, well, what do you want me to do in this situation? I can remember being called to a mental health hospital that had a crisis line outside. And their protocol was when someone picked up that crisis phone, they called 911 and they wouldn't come out and talk to the patient. It was our job to make that first contact and our job to assess them. And I was like, well, what do you want us to do in this situation? I don't have the training to do this or the
Yeah,
tools or
that's
the
weird.
It was, and it was because they wanted us to clear them medically before, but we weren't allowed. If they had a medical, they guess they have to go to the hospital. So it ended up just being this cycle of like, I don't have the right tools to cope with this, for one, and two, to like provide them care. And so it was just like very frustrating. And so I think coping tools is a broad term to just talk about like help them understand really what they can do and give them the tools to access different resources, and then understanding like you're going to need to talk to somebody throughout this job. Like anybody who thinks they can do this on their own is sort of, we all have some sort of outlet, right?
Yeah.
So it's a super necessary thing.
So what is your outlet?
Oh geez. I have a lot of outlets. So, I mean, I love to ski. I do that. I spend a lot of time outdoors. I was a pretty avid musician before moving here to New Mexico. I used to play in a bluegrass band. I haven't really found a large bluegrass music scene here in New Mexico, but I used to have a lot of fun, and like just honestly getting together with people and being able to share something, positive, was really is a great thing for me. And being where I live in New Mexico, I live in kind of northeast of Santa Fe, up in the mountains, and we have access to tons of nature. And so just being outside, fishing, hiking, skiing, anything like that is, I know kind of everyone sort of says all this stuff like, I like to be outside, but it really is, I think, a positive thing. It can really reset how you feel and what you're thinking, and kind of help get rid of some of those negative thoughts. Um, but those are my main outlets. I also probably do the wrong thing of like dumping a lot of stuff on a partner, which I know can be really bad, which is why I think uh, having like other outlets is good. So,
Oh no, it definitely is. Definitely is. I am also, I wouldn't call it dumping it on a partner. Like like we talked
oh,
about in the beginning, I really like to share stories, and sometimes those are some of my worst stories that I'm sharing, and I want to get people's thoughts and just talk about it.
yeah, and I I I agree, and I don't think, yeah, dumping is a bad term, but I think sometimes, yeah, it's hard because, when we talk to someone who has been in this job and has experienced it, they get that like need to share, where it's like sometimes a partner that's like, or friend even, or family member that hasn't been in that, they're just like, why are you sharing all this? Like it can be feeling like too much sometimes, I think, because it's like this is really stressful to hear about.
Yeah.
So I think I have a hard time sometimes with that, like balancing that over sharing, over like relying on somebody to be kind of that thing. Like,
There are still stories that I have that I won't even share with my wife, because I know that it's too much, too much. But if it's another EMT, I'm like, hey, you want to hear a cool story? It's not, it might not be great, but you want to talk about it? Because I want to talk about it. Let's talk about it.
yeah, and I think that's how we share things too, is like with each other. Like, here's this cool story, and sometimes that's like a way of sort of offloading that. I don't know, sharing it. It may be a positive story, but it's just like I think just sharing those things with other people. I mean, that's literally how the first talk therapy around PTSD was started, with Vietnam vets waiting for psychiatrists, and they were like, well, we don't have enough psychiatrists to talk to these veterans, so let's create these support groups where they can just talk to each other. And they actually found like, oh, this talking and sharing experiences really helps. So I think that's super positive.
Yeah, I agree. Huge correlations noted between people getting to talk about it and versus people feeling isolated, right? Because sometimes you do have those providers that just don't want to talk about it. And I think you can definitely, in most cases, you can tell when somebody's not feeling like sharing.
Yeah, and I think, any way you look at it, it's just a hard job, but it is a very rewarding job, and there's so many positive things. But this is a very hard job, and I try to tell, as an educator, try to prepare students for that reality. You're going to be in situations you have no idea what to do, and it's okay, you know. And so that, when we teach coping mechanisms, that's really what it boils down to, is like you don't always have to know the answer or have the tool to fix the problem.
Yeah, no, it's very true. So have you had any calls or situations where you just felt like, what the fuck do I do next?
Yeah, I've had a lot of calls like that. There's been many, many calls where I feel like I have been in that situation, been put in that situation. And I think, I'm working in areas with a lot of mental health, a lot of issues, a lot of substance abuse issues. And I've been thrown into that position where my personal safety feels at risk. I can think of a time where we responded to a psych patient, and this was back on the ground ambulance, and this patient had stabbed his elderly caregiver in the abdomen and eviscerated her,
Mm.
and walked into this abdominal evisceration. And now we have a trauma patient, and then with the psych patient we were there for is still in the house with the weapon. And now we're de-escalating a mental health crisis and dealing with a trauma patient. And it was like, wow, this is a crazy situation to find yourself in. As like at the time, I think I was only like 24 years old, and I'm like,
Oh,
how do you manage that? And you're just like, okay, on to the next call, and it's like, you just do the best you can. You're like, I'm going to de-escalate, I'm going to treat the trauma patient. But it's like you find yourself in these situations all the time, and it's a crazy job.
it is crazy. And how do you tell people that without like until they're in it, they're not really going to understand like some of the situations that you're put in. So how did you manage that psych and trauma patient at the same time?
Well, luckily, I think we arrived with five of us, so there was enough people to kind of secure the knife, talk to the patient who was severely injured, and start managing those injuries and remove them from the scene. I think that was kind of like our primary goal. But it was just all these logistical things that had to happen. Like we had to get a hold of police, we had to get this patient to the right care, we had to get another ambulance. It was just like all these things that have to happen, which I do think we're good at, is like falling back on like, okay, I gotta get A, B, C, D done here. And when those situations present themselves, we fall back on that like stress response of just like, well, this is what I learned to do, and I'm going to just do that. And that helps. And then, but after, it's kind of like the afterwards where you're like, whoa, that is a hard situation to like wrap your head around, right?
Yeah.
It's like you got to process that scenario. And I think it's really hard to teach somebody to prepare them for that. So I try not to share stuff like that with, too many war story type things, when I'm teaching, but it's important to like explain that the job can be really dynamic and challenging and try to prepare people for that as best we can.
Exactly. And by you like sharing a story like that, now they're going to remember that, right? So if they're ever in a situation where they have a medical patient with potentially also a psych patient, they're going to be like, okay, like divide and conquer, right? Separate the situation and get it figured out, call for additional resources if we need additional resources, and then get PD. Definitely get PD to where you need to be.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that was just the biggest thing was like walking into that and feeling so like, uh-oh, we just walked into a really bad situation with a potentially violent person with a weapon and a severely injured person. And it's like trying to get over that initial like and just manage the situation and with managing your own safety and all that stuff, it can be, yeah, challenging.
So were you on a fire rig at that time? Like why were there 5 people that showed up?
So there, the firefighters do the ambulance and you do all of the things. So I was on a medic unit at the time. Actually, I think I was on an engine that day in the medic unit. So we rotated we had an engine and an ambulance at our station, and we would rotate. The firefighter would get to rotate sometimes between the engine and the ambulance to like hopefully get some sleep off the ambulance for a night or something like that. So we would always sort of, when you go on calls, you always are sort of on call with those same people. And that is a benefit, I think, of that dynamic. Still not a huge fan of the dual role EMS service. I really think it should be its own thing. But that particular dynamic for those types of calls where you have the same people you're going on calls with and you really know how everybody and you're like comfortable with people, it makes that situation much more manageable, I think, versus like showing up and there's 5 total strangers, which can totally happen. But what made that is we knew everybody, we all knew each other, and like it was makes that kind of stressful situation a lot easier.
Yeah, that's a good point. So when you work in a two-tier system, right, where you have a fire department who responds and then you have a separate ambulance response, that can be intimidating, and then you have a struggle of power on the scene, right? So where I worked, it took probably 3 or 4 years before the firefighters were like, "Hey Sam, it's good to see you today." Where before it was like, "Oh, the ambulance is here, they're just going to transport the patient, but this is my scene," until they get off and into that ambulance, right? So like you have that power dynamic and there's just a struggle between those two entities, and you don't know how to, you might not necessarily know how to adapt over that.
Oh yeah, it's a super challenging thing to navigate. And I wish our profession was better, or the fire service in general and the EMS was better at not being that way with new people and different services. And yeah, I can remember instances as a firefighter with certain crews, they would not let the ambulance in the scene. They would just make them wait outside. And I was like, that's not doing anybody any good. And it's just making people hate their job.
Right.
So not great.
No.
But yeah, it is sort of just this older culture of things. It's not excusing it, but it is a challenge. And that's another thing you got to prepare people for is like, how do you deal with that interpersonal relationship with another entity and still do your job? And so it can be challenging. And I think when I got into flight, it was such a breath of fresh air to like be around a different environment, like be more integrated with the hospital, working with, a nurse or, a physician or whoever, versus like this world I had come from where it was just like this always on edge, sort of making sure you're not like looking weird or doing something to like upset somebody. And it was like, oh, I can just sort of like be myself in this environment and just take care of patients. And I really liked that about that, making that transition for sure.
Yeah, no, it was a huge culture shock for me when I switched into flight, because you do go from this like eat each other up kind of environment. And now you're in like, oh, somebody wants to teach me something. This is really cool. I'm learning a lot of things, and it's definitely a better environment and more conducive to learning.
Definitely. And like, we're going to challenge you, and I think that's something that I have just, we undervalue in like education and like growth is like the power of being challenged and how that makes people rise to a different, like, kind of grow in their own way and become their own provider and grow as a person and mature. Whereas if like you're just constantly like belittling somebody, they don't grow. They kind of like revert into their shell. They do just enough to not, create a wave or draw attention to themselves. But when you like let people be challenged and let them grow, I think it's hugely beneficial. And so that's like when we try to teach students, we try to not, I know a lot of medic programs bring that fire mentality into the classroom, like uniform inspections, and they got to clean the toilets in the college, all these things. And that is absolutely, I think, the wrong way to approach treating adults. And I think, yeah, we have to look professional. That's part of the job for sure, because we go to people's homes and all that stuff. But if we let people just grow and be who they are and challenge them in ways that allows them to kind of like explore their own creativity a little bit and critically think and come out of their shells, it's like that's how I want to see students progress through our program, not terrified of being dropped because their belt was, crooked or something like that.
Yeah. People talk about these experiences with the fire service, and I will say that that is one of the reasons why I didn't continue in fire. The very first fire department that I was at was so respectful and so amazing and so patient with me when I was learning, and like super helpful to getting me to where I needed to be a good firefighter and a good EMT. And then when I moved, the fire service that I was going to apply for just left such a sour taste with me. The way that I watched the way that they were treating females specifically, and then treating other people and other providers, just I had no interest in continuing with the fire service, and that's how I continued on with EMS and becoming a paramedic, and then moving on to critical care.
Yeah. And I think that story and feeling is shared by like so many people. And it's a challenge they have as a they're the fire service has its own unique staffing challenges. We tend to lump EMS into that because most fire services are providing some form of EMS. But I think that is a unique challenge because it comes from a culture that is not super welcoming to many people. And it can be really challenging to enter that world. And yeah, how do you change that? I don't know. But I think when we get sort of lumped into fire service staffing problems as EMS providers, it's like, I think that's a different problem that you're facing. It's not that people don't want to come work on the ambulance, it's that people don't want to be in that environment.
Yeah.
And maybe look at the environment and how do you change that and make it a little better. So,
And I think looking from the outside now in the last few years, it's definitely progressed into becoming a more welcoming environment for new people, which is good to see. And I just hope that that is something that's happening everywhere and not just in one department.
I think our generation is a little less willing to like kind of put up with those kind of working conditions, if you will. And I think, I already seeing and talking to my old friends and colleagues from my old fire department, and they're like, oh, things have really changed here, because a lot of people that were in my academy are now in leadership roles, and that has changed. That can help change the culture, pretty dramatically. Hopefully, something that happens. I mean, obviously, we need firefighters, right? We want people to go be firefighters. We don't want people to not go do that job. So we got to make sure that people want to go there too.
Yeah. Just 80% of it's EMS, right? So a lot of our EMTs go off to be firefighters.
Yeah, exactly. And get a lot of firefighter, eight EMTs and EMTs in our paramedic program. So my thing is like for this little 15-month stint where I have you, we're gonna, challenge you in a different way. And I think, and then maybe you can go back to your department and, bring, if you learn one thing out of here that helps advance not only the medical care that you're providing, but, maybe makes the working environment a little better for everybody. I think that's a good thing.
So are you still in the field?
So I've been out of the field for like a year and a half, other than I was working as a paramedic as a ski patroller for a while, seasonally, and just focusing on teaching. I've also been in school full time. I just finished advanced paramedic practitioner, but it's a bachelor's program in Colorado, and then also did all the prereqs for PA school. So that was kind of my goal. After leaving flight, I was like, I'm going to go be a PA. And I've gotten to where I'm done with everything and ready to apply, but I've sort of like, I have a lot of hard feelings about leaving the profession completely and like just going to a totally different thing. I'm like, I don't want to leave EMS, right? Like I really want to stay in EMS and like I want to be a part of it and want to like make it better and help grow new roles. And so it's hard for me to like think about jumping into a completely different field. That's why I kind of like am excited about the NEMSAC proposal to create true paramedic practitioners like graduate level, because I think that would be amazing to stay in EMS and progress clinically. So that's been my focus, and I just actually accepted a PRN position up in Colorado. I will shout out this service because they're doing really great stuff. Gunnison Valley Paramedics, they're just a great group of people, and they're really trying to be a progressive premier agency. They're in a very rural area, and they hire flight paramedics to work kind of in their 911 system, both doing interfacility and providing like a high level of care in their community. So they have a lot of really great technology. They're doing labs in the field, blood, ultrasound, vents, all the cool stuff, but also just doing a really good job at it. So I've been toying with the idea of going up there PRN and just decided to kind of make that jump and do that on the side. So
That'll be cool. Congratulations. That is a big step. So that'll be fun for you. I think it sounds like it's going to be challenging, and it sounds like you will, get an opportunity to go potentially learn new skills and push those new skills hopefully back here where you're teaching.
yeah, it's exactly what I'm like wanting to do, just stay in the field, continue to be challenged. And so that's why I'm like willing to make that drive out there to continue practicing in some way.
That's awesome. So, in your time in the field that you had previously, were you ever coined as a black cloud?
Um, yeah, I would say so. I've had, that title sort of comes and goes, but I've definitely had some partners that were like, "Oh no, we're working together." So, but not in a negative way, but in a positive way. But I'm going to be really busy, and we're going to get some stuff today. I had the amazing opportunity to be a flight paramedic in Lake Tahoe, and that was just an incredible place to fly. And those people ended up becoming like family. I was actually one of the first paramedics to work in that company at that base, because it was traditionally for like 20 plus years a nurse only program, and they transitioned to having flight paramedics. So I was like one of the first. So it started out a little rough, but ended up being super close. But I definitely had that reputation there. We would be up all night on some crazy ground transport in the snow, or like, some hiking on top of some mountain, carrying up somebody in a in a makeshift stretcher or something crazy. And so it just always ended up being an adventure, which was probably my favorite part about working there, is that like you never knew where you were going to end up.
Did you see a lot of trauma, or what was like your flavor of call?
That was what was really cool about that base, is in most flight programs, and I think this is good for paramedics to hear, is like you're mostly doing interfacility, right? Like you're mostly deal with the transfers, and like on a good day you're like, oh, I got some really good critical care skills in. But that base was different. It was like being a paramedic on an ambulance. We were heavily 911 scene call, so it was a lot of scene flights, In the wintertime, flying a lot of injured skiers, snowmobilers, car accidents, that kind of thing. And in the summertime, lots of lost hikers. We helped do search and rescue quite a bit. We did a lot of backcountry type of calls because we would be the fastest, resource to get there. So it was a really fun place to work just because of that. It would say, 30% of our calls were probably interfacility and the rest were mostly 911 calls. So it was a really fun environment to work in.
That sounds like a lot of fun. It sounds like they kept you pretty busy, which is pretty cool. So, what would you say has been like one of your favorite cases or favorite calls that you've ever had?
Oh, favorite calls. Um, they all sort of have. It's hard to pick one favorite call, but I would say I think calls where I've really had to critically think whether it's been a really sick patient or a really complicated situation or combination of the two. One of my like favorite scene calls I ever went on was there's this really beautiful waterfall in the desolation wilderness, and we had to land like nearby, and there was a person down in this falling off this waterfall. It was just a really complicated rescue, and then ended up in a really complicated like care of the patient while intubating, like on the scene and doing a lot of different things. And there's just so many mechanisms and a hoist ship and working together with the medics from the hoist helicopter and the fire department and like everybody working together. And it was just like the situation this patient was in to being at the hospital seemed like almost an impossible like A to B.
Yeah.
And just like seeing it all come together and like ending with the patient being at the place they needed to be, you know, was just a really, those types of calls I really feel like are awesome to be a part of. It's like, oh, this is why I do this. And that call it was just a call I was thinking about. Like, wow, this is just such a cool call. Like, I'm in this beautiful area and working together with all these people to like get this patient out of this really terrible situation. So,
Yeah, no, that sounds really cool. I love when you have a great call with great team members, right? Even people that you've never met or don't know very well, and you're all able to come together and do what's best for that patient. That's such a cool thing. Another one of those things that you can't really describe to people until they've been in that situation.
yeah. And it's just like those people that you were there with. It's like, it's hard to fabricate that in any other relationship in your life, really. It's like they have such a big part of those. I don't know, you share that stressful situation, you overcome some major hurdle. It's like you end up super close to people that you go through those situations with. And yeah.
Wow, that's super cool. Do you have any do you have any calls or cases that maybe almost broke your career or made it so that you almost quit your job altogether?
Yeah, 100%. So, and that this one isn't hard because I can think to like the very exact moment of like, what the heck am I doing this for? I actually had just went to paramedic school and I was in my first paramedic job and I was working in rural Northern California on the coast. And I had a call in the middle of the night at I don't really remember what the exact dispatch was for, but I think it was for like a head injury or something like that. So we showed up. It was very late at night, raining out. Guy had been on top of this woman's car and she was trying to drive off to get out of this situation. And he was trying to break in through the sunroof and he fell off and hit his head. It was pretty much fine, very stable. The fire department had him backboarded. You could tell though he was visibly very agitated, and I was like blocking that right away. So the first thing I remember asking was, "Did you check for weapons?" And the police said, "Oh yeah, we patted him down. He's good." Okay. So me being at the time, I was 21. I was this making $9 an hour as a paramedic, and I'm on a 96-hour shift. And this call is like, I think it's my last night and just want to go home, load this patient in the back. I'm already kind of like worried that things are going to go south and the doors close. Just always remember the sound of those doors closing and this get on the highway and this guy just freaks out. completely ended up, I think, being really intoxicated on meth. Uh, but was able, we at this point, we actually used duct tape, believe it or not, rural EMS, but duct tape to put people on backboards, uh, and and like a D-ring strap. And he broke this duct tape and the D-ring and sat up and ripped the C collar off and pulled out a putty knife and started coming after me and just screaming all kinds of stuff like I kidnapped his kid and all. I was like, okay, I don't know what's going on. And I realized very quickly like I was not going to fight this person and it wasn't going to go well. I was not going to de-escalate the situation. Like it went from 0 to 100 really quickly. And so my full like fight or flight, I tried to jump out. We were on the highway going like 60 miles an hour, and I tried to grab the door to get out of the ambulance, and I couldn't get out of the ambulance because the doors automatically lock. So I was like stuck in the corner of the ambulance. My partner slammed on the brakes. Patient fell, and luckily the fire engine saw like commotion, and we pulled over, and they jumped in the back, and we were able to restrain the guy and get him back on the gurney. And when we get to the hospital, they start cutting off his clothes, and they get to his sweatshirt pocket, and there was a loaded handgun in that pocket. Mm. And I was just like, oh man, just so close to losing my life over what, nothing for $9 an hour.
Yeah.
4 days without sleep. And I'm just like, I remember going home from that shift, like, well, also, nothing happened. The guy wasn't charged with anything, police. I was like, do you want to take a report? And they were just kind of like brushed it off like it was just part of the job, and I was kind of told that by my employer and everybody else, like, oh yeah, it just happens. And I was like, I don't know if I want to be in this environment. Like that was where it was like that line for me was crossed. And yeah, it was a super stressful call. Better believe I check people now before they go or in a bag. I learned very quickly. And I'm glad I didn't leave the profession because I've had so many other great times since then, and it's led to where I am now. But less than a year into being a paramedic, that was almost the end of my career right there.
Yeah, it could have definitely been a different situation, right? That's unfortunate that you had to go through that, and I'm glad that you learned and that you have checked all of your patients since then, because that is very scary.
And it's just, you can't trust anybody. If they say, yeah, they checked them, it's like, you better double check.
Yeah, always double check, right?
Yeah. And I think, that I didn't realize how much that call affected me until later on in my career. Something would happen that kind of reminded me of that feeling of being like trapped with somebody coming down on top of you and like fearing for your life, really. And like I can remember being on a mandatory at the fire department, and I was with crew I didn't know, trying to be like, oh, totally, I wasn't on probation anymore, but acting like I was basically. And somebody closed the door to the ambulance. It just sent me into like a panic attack, really. Like I had to like hide in a bedroom with the lights off to out of that situation. So it's like, it's crazy, these things follow you, and you have to sort of work through that for sure.
Yeah, no, that's terrible. And you don't know what's going to happen until it happens, right? It's just something that like triggers you, and you don't know what it is, but it just gets you, and you're like, what do I do right now? What do I do to get out of this?
Yeah. And I think it took me until now in my life to look back and be like, oh, that's what that was. At the time, I was like, oh, I've drank too much caffeine. I've been up for 3 days. I'm on a mandatory. I'm stressed. And that's what's causing this. But I realized what those feelings were coming from. And I was like, it's pretty powerful. So
it is pretty powerful. Do you feel comfortable sharing maybe one of your worst flights or worst calls or cases?
Yeah, I can share a call. And yeah, definitely feel good. And I think it's important on these types of platforms to be able to share that. When you're sitting around Thanksgiving with your family and someone's like, tell me about your worst thing, it's like, such a different context, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Uh, but yeah, it's, these calls really are hard to sometimes go through. And I thought when I got into flight, like, well, I should have known, you're going to be flying really sick patients. You're going to be flying critically injured patients. But I was in like, I felt so much better about my environment. Like, I was like, oh, I come to work, you know, we decorate our station, we like watch movies. It's like, we're just like chilling. Everybody's there to do the job and everything's fine. And like super uh, family atmosphere, but everyone, it's a really accepting atmosphere. So I really loved that about that. And I sort of forgot about like how stressful calls can be. And I was working with a nurse who had been a flight nurse for like a year probably, but hadn't really had any really horrible scene calls. And we got called for a vehicle rollover, and we landed on scene and we saw the ambulance like driving up to us full speed, and I was like, ooh, that's not good, something's weird.
Yeah.
And where I had to jump out, and I was like, whoa, 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 stop, because they were getting pretty close to the aircraft. And basically the story was this vehicle was going down a rural road. It was a dad in the front seat and his 6-year-old daughter in the back seat in a car seat. Just happened to drop a back tire off the edge of the road going around a corner and hit some soft gravel with that one tire, and it caused his vehicle to like roll down this embankment. He was totally fine, completely self-extricated, not a scratch on him, but the back of the car had been completely crushed. And the daughter, who was alive and talking when they got there, as soon as they used the spreaders to lift the car away so they could get her out, she coded. And sorry,
No, it's okay.
but yeah, so they pulled up in the ambulance, and she was bleeding pretty heavily from her mouth and needed her airway control. They were trying to do chest compressions, and yeah, we kept getting her back. We kept getting Rosk, and then I would try to intubate her and miss the tube, and then I didn't use the bougie on the stupid first attempt, and then they kept doing chest compressions. We got her back, pulled out, did another attempt, used the bougie, got it, and then it was like just this, you know, dancing, trying to get pulse back versus losing her, get a pulse back, lose her, get a pulse back. We decompressed her bilaterally, and just so much blood was coming out of her mouth. And I just, it was just such a hard thing to see that little girl like so mangled like that.
Yeah.
And kind of feeling like maybe you're missing the tube. She was hypoxic for that one extra minute. And, maybe, but, I've since been able to realize that that's not the case, but that was a pretty hard call.
Yeah, it sounds like it was a hard call, and I'm sorry you had to go through that, man. I can guarantee you 100% you missing that first tube it didn't change the outcome. It wouldn't have changed anything.
And I realize that now, and, but you correlate those things in that situation, I think, to feeling like, oh, but you realize like there's just massive trauma. And so it's okay.
It is okay.
We move on. And I think it doesn't deter me from wanting to do this job. It's not, those calls don't be like, oh, I can't do this. It's just like, yeah, those situations are why we're here, really. I mean, we're the people that bring that to those patients to try to give them the best possible outcome. And when we, do good at our job, we train, we practice, we learn the things. We don't just do the cookie cutter, easy way on everything. We give them the best possible chance. And so, yeah, it was another good example of like a team really working together, and it was just unfortunately not a good outcome.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I know that was hard.
No, it's good. I think there's not many platforms to share it. I hope, if this is on a podcast episode, it makes people realize like, hey, everybody has these feelings. Like maybe I had that, and it's okay to, man, feel like banged up about that. That was years ago. And even thinking about talking about it makes me like well up all those feelings. So I think it's good to share it and to normalize people not being okay after calls and like part of this profession and something that other hopefully somebody hears that and is like, yeah, I had a call like that and maybe I can talk about it too or something like that. So
Right, because we want people to share. You want, and it's okay if that was a call that was bad enough to take you out of the field. You know your breaking limit. You know what you are capable of handling. And if you are strong enough to realize that that is something that is going to break you forever and you don't feel like you can go on, that's more power to you for stepping out. You know what I mean?
yeah, and I think that's important because if you don't have a like if you're like I don't want to seem like the person that can't do it and like I'm mentally like can't handle this, so I'm going to stick around. I think it takes a lot more strength to realize, like you said, that you have hit that this is not healthy for you. And it's really it's not healthy for anybody, but I think we all have our strengths, right? We all bring certain strengths to certain situations and we all bring certain dynamics to like an environment or a team. And I think, realizing that saying like, hey, I'm tapping out because that this is something that I don't is going to affect my ability to be on this team. I think that takes a huge amount of strength to do that.
Yep. You've spent a lot of time and energy into this training, and then realizing that you need to step down is good. But it's not just good for you, it's good for your patients, right? It's good for your family, it's good for everybody.
Yeah, for sure. I agree 100%. I did want to talk briefly about some of the other things we're trying to do with our program and a new course we're going to be offering in New Mexico, which I think is really great for the state.
Yes, please do.
So this is kind of like what I talked to you about originally on reaching out to you is to get the word out about some of the things we're trying to do. So not only with our paramedic training, but also we're launching a new course this summer. And it's going to be a critical care paramedic course. And so that is something we're super excited about here at the college and really excited to offer and hope that it, helps grow the amount of well-trained providers in our states that can work in these types of critical care transport capacities. So basically, it's going to start this summer is going to be our first course, and we have putting together our instructor pool now. So I know I would love to have you come and help teach as well. I know
I
I
would love
expressed
that.
interest in that. We would definitely love to have you. And we also have gathered some other great people, and we have physicians and a lot of other people are going to come and help make it a success. So starting in the summer, it's going to be an 8-week course, probably 2 days a week, one day predominantly looking at like mostly using our simulation lab, which is very comprehensive. So we can set up as critical and crazy of sims as we want. And also some, obviously lecture academic portion, but getting as many people involved that are really passionate about the industry and just want to put on a great course. So I think the idea came around locally, our local agency is saying, hey, we're getting these requests for like very sick transfers and we just don't have the staff that are capable of doing things like impella transfers and intubated kids and with like really bad pneumonia and stuff like that. So things that require some critical care level. And so we were like, let's look at putting on this course and look at trying to grow the level within your agency. And that's kind of people as far as truth or consequences reaching out like, hey, we're doing critical care, but we send our people to Kansas to get training. It's like, well, that's not, you know, we should have something here for that. So we just got it through all the approval process, which was a very big learning curve to like actually create a new college course and what goes into that. It's not just like, oh, we're going to do this. It's like it's got to go through state approval at not just an EMS level, but like higher education, the state of New Mexico it has to go through that layer. It has to go through the college, and you have to review your curriculum, and so it's quite a process. And we luckily just are like getting through that and coming out the other end, and we're ready to start. Hopefully, it'll be on the schedule and people can start applying for it. So really excited to offer that.
No, that is so exciting, dude. That is so exciting. What are people going to walk away with at the end of that 8 weeks?
So what they're going to walk away with is we're going to give them a course completion that they've taken our critical care training. So that similar to like, CCEMTP, but they're also going to be prepared to take the FPC or CCP. And we're working on getting our course approved right now with IBSC,
Yes.
or the International Board of Specialty Certifications, for those who don't know what that acronym is. And then we'll hopefully be able to offer the exams here too, because that's another issue in New Mexico, is it's really hard to find test sites for those exams. I think they do let you take it at home now, which is kind of cool. So by the end of the class, we're going to have everybody take that test. So they should be well prepared to take the test, but they're also going to, the difference between like a class like this and taking, a flight medical provider course through like one of these private education companies, which, they're great. I used FlightBridge Ed to get my FPC, but what you don't get out of that is like how to actually do the job, like how to move somebody with 6 drips to your pump and equipment and move them to your gurney and then manage them, and like, manage all the different little aspects, and like how do you decide what to do, and how do you do to assess this type of patient, how do you interface with like these different specialties of care that you're not normally interfacing with. And so we're really going to try to engineer as much of that as we can, and so that when people come out of the class, they're actually ready to go to work, not just holding a cert and then they have to be trained. They have that ability to jump in and start switching, drips over and manage the vent and manage like different types of equipment like Impellas and, EVDs and different things that they might encounter. So that's sort of our goal, is to really build a comprehensive course.
Well, that's exciting, dude. I'm really looking forward to that.
Yes, and obviously we'll talk more about getting you in here and helping put together sims and working to be an instructor for that. I think it would be great to have you, and really excited about some of the other folks that have been involved, and just like how cool our community and EMS is here. It's just like people that are like, oh, let me help you with that. Like, it's the best thing we can possibly make it. Yeah, super excited.
Well, let me know, because I'm ready whenever you are, friend.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'll send you the information.
Awesome, Drew. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been an absolute pleasure having you on, and it has been very informative. I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah, it's been great. I was super happy, just like I said, to come on to a platform, meet somebody new, and be able to share personal stuff and exciting stuff and talk about things. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, no problem, dude. Well, I hope you have a good day, and I look forward to talking to you pretty soon.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening. Before we wrap up, we have a few important announcements to share with you. Firstly, we're excited to announce the launch of our brand new 911 Nonsense Facebook group page. It's a community where everyone can go to connect, share ideas, discuss topics from the show, and get all of the most recent updates about the podcast. We'd love to have you join us and be part of the conversation. Next, we want to ask you to rate and review our podcast on your preferred platform. Your feedback means the world to us and helps us reach a wider audience. By rating and reviewing the show, you'll be supporting us in a big way and helping others discover 911 Nonsense. If you enjoy what we do and would like to support the podcast even further, we have a few options available. You can visit samspursuit.com to find the links to our 911 Nonsense merch page and our recently released Noon gear page. Every contribution, no matter the size, goes a long way in helping us continue to better the podcast. We know that not everyone is comfortable being on the podcast, but we still want to hear your stories and experiences. If you have a compelling story and would like to share it to be read by me in a future episode, please reach out to us via email at 911nonsense@gmail.com or through our website's contact section. If you choose to be anonymous, we'll make sure to respect your privacy while sharing your story in a way that resonates with our audience. Thank you again for tuning in. We truly appreciate your support and look forward to bringing you more engaging content in the future. See you next week.